Hi everyone, this is Norm from Griz and Norm. Today I'm going to review my process or skim over my process of gesture drawing through the use of figure drawing. We're going to go over the topic of line of action, silhouette, shapes, volumes, and most important of all to me, weight, something that's not talked about enough, I think. There's so much more to cover than what I'm about to go over, but please be patient. All of these other topics will be covered in the future in future videos. So thank you for joining us. So you may have noticed that I'm using portrait mode right now, which may be unusual, but for me, it's the simplest way to convey what I do usually on paper when I draw from live figures, from people in real life and in the studio, and when I draw on paper. So to me, it helps convey the whole figure through broad strokes. And so please accept this weird format right now, but for now, this is really going to help me convey what I need to convey. This is a typical setup for me when I'm in a live drawing session, a figure drawing session. I look back and forth at the model, at my page, and I really try to draw from the shoulder in order to have these big, broad strokes that convey energy and the feel of the model. I use a Conte stick, sort of a compressed charcoal stick that is sort of pointy at the end or tapered. The tip helps me to draw those sort of thin lines, and the side of it I can use to some degree to shade or to build sort of a soft structure underneath if I need to. So it's very versatile. Before I get into explanations and tips, let's just do a little bit of warm-up to show you how I approach 30 seconds gestures. So for these gestures, there's 30 seconds gestures, it goes by really quickly. All I'm trying to do is to loosen up and really sort of break down the stiffness that may have accumulated by either not drawing or thinking too much about the structure or all those things. All I'm trying to do is to quickly but accurately convey the figure I'm seeing. But really kind of trying to focus on what's essential. In 30 seconds, it's very humbling because you don't really have time to nail down any expressions or real structure. All you're trying to do is to give a feel for the pose and the energy that you're feeling, some of the weight. So all these basic stuff that you hear about, like line of action, balance, all those things, that's when you can really sort of use those to your advantage and push those poses a little bit more than what you can see. It helps to convey what it feels like more than what it looks like. So of course you're trying to draw what you're seeing, but a gesture, I think for me, is the point where you push it to a point where it goes beyond the drawing. It's trying to explain to an audience that's looking at it how that pose feels when you're seeing it, or if you were to do it yourself. So really, you can see how loose I am. There's things I don't finish. Sometimes I don't even put hands or feet. I try to put the feet because to me, especially if it's a standing figure, that's where the weight is balanced or supported. You can see I often draw a little line, cast shadow at the bottom, just to hint at where the character is standing and where the feet are planted, how they're supporting the weight. To me, that's really, really important, and it's often something that's missing when people are drawing many figures on one page. They can look great, but I just feel like it misses the point of trying to figure out that weight. So when I draw one figure on every page, I may, in a way, be wasting a lot of paper, but that's not the case with digital in this case. But it helps me figure out the weight and how the character is balancing that weight. So you can see, like, the more I'm warming up, the more I'm simplifying, and you see this sort of curves and pinch and straights and curves that you see like on the right side. And I'm already shading a little bit to give some structure. I'm probably going to draw a little cast shadow. No time, so to the next one. So I'm really trying, this is a sitting pose. I shouldn't be doing anything else than drawing, and I shouldn't be using any other tool. In my opinion, it's a waste of time. That's why I just draw on one page. That's why I only use one tool, no erasing. Digital is too tempting sometimes, and that's the case here. So I tried not to miss putting a cast shadow, just to suggest some weight to the next one. And you can see I often draw a line in the middle to sort of separate the body in two, but where I put it kind of suggests sort of a twist or the angle where the torso or hip is, and even more so if there's more of a twist to it. We'll get into that in more advanced sessions. You can see I'm really just kind of simplifying the legs and the arms. I barely have time to finish. Sometimes I'm overthinking it. The goal is really to loosen up and to really try to convey as loosely what it feels like more than what it really is. And as the faster you draw, the more you kind of have to take kind of some shortcuts and create shapes that simplify, let's say like here the torso and the legs or the tibia or anything that you're seeing, like everything becomes, there's certain symbols that starts to appear in your work, and that's not a bad thing. It's a really good thing that to me helps me translate that work into my storyboarding work or design work, but mostly storyboarding, where I have to draw really fast and sometimes a little symbol here and there that convey a lot of information. Can be great, especially when you kind of find it in real life and it comes from your own exploration and not just copying others or some other styles. To me, that's why I love gesture drawing so much and life drawing, is that I find my own sort of symbols and my own language for simplifying the characters, as you should all do, but from life, not necessarily from looking at other people's work. So to me, that's essential, to find the inner energy of these characters through gesture drawing, but also sort of these little symbols, like see what I'm doing with that line under the jaw that can sort of go, that little curve that serves as the jaw I'd like to look under. And sometimes it's what I'm doing with gesture drawing is it's almost like as the most information I can give to myself if I had to pick it up later. Could I finish? Does it tell me the most amount of information I can put in the very limited amount of time? That's what I'm trying to achieve in gesture drawing. To give myself, if I was to pick up that drawing, that super simple gesture drawing, a week from now, a day from now, or a year from now, being able to sort of complete it with still retaining that energy and that loose feeling that as an audience we all want to keep in our drawing, because sometimes as soon as we start to clean up our drawing, we lose that energy, we lose that initial fun that we had, or that we could feel at least from the model or from a pose or from a character, whatever that is that you're drawing. Gesture drawing to me, like, the more I do it, the more I want to do more, because I feel it's a way to almost have a complete picture without spending really a lot of time and really conveying a ton of information in 30 seconds to a minute to 2 minutes. And it really helps me in my storyboarding work because there's so much drawing to do, so many panels, that if I were to overthink every panel and every pose and every muscle, every bone that I'm drawing, it would be hell. So I'm really trying to use all that knowledge and get better and better at conveying things as quick as I can, but with an accuracy, something that I've learned to simplify through repetition. And also training my eye to see things a certain way. Because really it's not I'll repeat it over and over. It's not necessarily an exercise in drawing what you see as accurately as possible. It's trying to convey as quickly as possible what the model is conveying, what it feels like, or what it inspires. So that's really what I'm trying to go for in these quick poses. So I feel like I'm simplifying more and more. It almost feels like a character design at this point. Like I'm really simplifying like this sort of arrow shape that I'm seeing in the pose. And I should mention where I'm drawing from. I should have mentioned it at the beginning. For these ones, I've used a tool, a website called Scott Eaton's. Scott Eaton Bodies in Motion. And this is a paid thing. I'm using the commercial use, so I pay for it. But it helps me see motions, and it's fantastic. So bodiesinmotion.com. That's what I've been using as a reference for these gesture drawings. And you'll see a bit more of it later on. So you can see more and more. I'm loosening up. You can see almost like known lines, or it's almost like I'm drawing both from what I'm seeing, but also from knowledge of how these structures are created. It becomes a mix. And that's not a bad thing. That's when your style sort of comes out. And your style should always be pushed by looking at more and more things in real life and trying to push your own style to evolve and find these shape language and that line language that you can only find by repetition and by practice. So this is something that I love drawing. It doesn't take much time. I don't feel like I need to think about what I'm drawing too much or what I'm trying to convey. I'm just trying to convey what I'm seeing in an expressive way. Now we're going to go over the concept of line of action. This is something that everyone has heard before, especially anyone that's interested in art or figure drawing or anything or animation. This is really something that helps convey, I guess, a grace, a direction, a purpose to a pose. It helps guide along the eye of the audience through the body in sort of a long, continuous line as much as possible. In order for something to not be graceful or pleasing to look at as much, I guess you could break it down and make it awkward. But in order to make something, I guess, appealing to a certain extent and easy to read and where it leads the eye, well, a line of action really helps you. So in this case, you see that line going through, the very bottom of the feet, through the whole leg, up to through the body, the spine, and up to the arm, and through the fingers. So it really sort of creates this big line of action. This is as clear as I can get. And of course, you see two legs, but there's always sort of a main line of action, I guess, to any poses, and that's what I'm trying to enforce or trying to showcase. It's not just the line that I'm trying to push. I'm trying to almost find any way to use angles in the body to help express that line of action. So something I do often is to, even if the drawing isn't exactly that, the pose isn't exactly like that, sometimes I'll tweak it a little bit so that the jawline will align with that general line or direction. That's something I do often to kind of help express the line passing through the body. Other things that I'll do is I always feel like the hands and feet are the exclamation points of the body. I will use the hand and continue that line throughout in a very kind of graceful way instead of breaking it or having sort of a wrist that would go in a way that blocks it or stops it. I want that line to continue as long as possible, so that one continuous long line to be as long as I can. And if you've ever had like a dancer or someone who's more of an athlete, or someone who's, especially dancers, are really great ballet dancers at creating those beautiful lines in their bodies. So it's always that search for a long, continuous lines. Like I said, the other leg is there to support the weight, but really that main line is through the toes, through the fingers. Lines of actions don't need to be straight. Sometimes they can be curves. They usually follow, of course, they tend to have their base in the spine, in the torso, and the hips, but it goes through the legs and the arms. So in this case, it's more of a C shape that we can find. So sometimes the pose isn't as clear as that. If you can tweak it a little bit to make it more graceful, why not? That's usually a way to make your poses more appealing or more interesting to look at. And often, like, I hear line of action and students would say, like, I can find one line of action. I would say, like, it's not necessarily a line, like, other than the spine itself. When you use both arms, for example, or the two legs, or different things, and sometimes it's even through clothing, it's more of a converging of lines and angles that kind of all lead the eyes towards something, a direction. Sometimes it's off screen, sometimes a character can be holding something of interest. And anything it can do to help the reading of that direction, I will usually do. So in this case, this little drawing I'm doing here, you see that sort of S-curve. I'm trying to tuck the head in a little bit, almost like someone praying down or kneeling down, putting their head behind, in between their shoulders. So that line is through the spine, goes through the arms, but there's that bump, that head, right? So the more I can push that head down, even if that's not exactly how the pose really is in front of you. There's nothing that forces you to draw exactly what's in front of you. For me, I'm using drawing to simplify silhouette and to express something. So for me, I use every tool I can to express more and simplify that whole silhouette. So that's what we're gonna get into now. And this whole idea is to clarify the intent behind the pose or the feeling. So silhouette. Silhouette, I feel like there's two ways to play with it. You either leave something in, or you push something out. If something feels slightly awkward, it's usually because let's say an arm or a bump or anything that stands out from a general silhouette that deviate from the goal or the idea behind it. It should be either tucked in or sort of left out, or sort of become the silhouette, like being moved away from the body or the main silhouette. So in this case, I would say that the main idea is sort of a character waving a cab, or trying to say hi to someone, wave his hand. That's where you want, and maybe a little bit of the face, maybe mouth open, but the idea is to look up, and this whole body is sort of moving up to flag something. The idea is to clarify the silhouette in storytelling, right? To say something, or even if it doesn't say something very clear, to have a point of interest in the pose. So let's say I'm redrawing it differently, and we just see a bump and it's unclear because if we were to black out everything, if it was backlit, for example, and the whole figure was black or darkened, it would feel like sort of an awkward bump, right? And it's almost like begging to be pushed inside completely. Or in this case, I feel like maybe we could push it, leave it out, part of this silhouette, because it almost feels like, oh, is this character missing an arm or is broken arm? If it's unclear, if that's not the point, well, let's make it more clear. Let's push the entire body up. I even pushed the one of the leg to be almost standing on its tippy toes. Its right leg, I mean from his right leg. So if the idea or the meaning is to have all these converging angles, all these arrows almost like leading the eye to the hand, maybe what I want to do is leave it down, almost like to force to lower that shoulder, that other shoulder, to really have that character sort of push up, almost like push himself up in the air to reach the sky or to kind of wave or whatever intent that is in storytelling. So the other way would be to have completely left it in, but maybe it would have been as clear or weird to think, does this character only have one arm? Is that weird? Who knows? But I feel like in this case, maybe leaving it out, but clearly was the main solution. Having a clear intent, and as you can see, I also pointed with the jaw as a line. So clarity of intent is our goal. Now let's talk about shapes. We've talked about directions and silhouette and lines of action, but shapes often are necessary to understand or express or use, especially when a character is lying down or a pose in life drawing is more kind of closed in, becomes harder to see a clear silhouette that comes from, a separate torso and leg parts, and when the limbs are tucked in or closed in on themselves in that way, at least visually, the use of shapes becomes very important. And when I say shape, I mean not just like using like a square and things like that. I just mean finding those organic shapes and angles in the body that express the idea and the feeling that the pose or that character, if it's drawn from imagination, exudes. So I try to find organic shapes, not square or too stale. Asymmetry is the goal here. To find organic shape that push in a direction, even if the character isn't necessarily moving. There's always sort of a direction or a general idea that leads the eye, and you want to use these shapes to express that. For example, here it's a straight-on pose from the back, and it's those sort of organic shapes that I'm trying to find in the back that will be later translated into volumes, because that's the goal afterwards, right? To identify shapes first, and I'm drawing this sort of spine line to express where that is. I'm already starting to express a little bit of volume through a little bit of shading. It really helps, but you can see like I'm stacking shapes kind of on top of each other, and a very slight shading afterwards helps to suggest volume and form afterwards. So the idea is to turn shapes into volumes. I could do an entire video on just that because it takes many repetition and many examples to express that confidently. Like I explained before, simple shapes that are transformed easily afterwards into volumes. A little bit of shading goes a long way to express those shapes into volumes, but also an additional line sometimes to show compression with the ground and with the shapes against each other. So on to volumes now. So volumes. I mean, as much as we want to talk about a silhouette and lines, the body is made of shapes and real volumes in 3D. So contour lines and shading helps quite a bit to express that. This is an example that can be found easily on a back pose, on a male or female, doesn't matter. In this case, more of a female shape. But if the legs are forward and backward, even from a straight on position, it's quite easy to feel these shapes and these volumes going forward and backward. The way to express them is through simple curves, I guess, that contour lines that you can put everywhere at first to understand. But the more you understand it, you can sort of simplify it to a few of them that are well placed, especially in creases, like let's say where the upper leg or the back leg connects with the backside. If it's compressed or pushed, you can see either like an in or an out, forward or backward. So this is an easy way to express that volume using those construction lines, I would say, or contour lines. It's not the most elegant, but to understand and to learn, this is invaluable. It helps express when, for example, I'm drawing an arm here that's kind of moving in space, and not just on a 2D plane, but on a 3D plane where the arm is not only going up, but it's going up and towards the chest, I guess. So using those contour lines, at least at first when you're kind of learning about those volumes, help express the volumes and where it stands in space. Same when you're doing some kind of foreshortening like this, when the arm is coming a little bit towards the viewer or the person watching, or me live drawing, can use these contour lines to express the arm going forward in space. So it's really about these contour lines. A little bit of shading goes a long way in order to express the volume of it as well. Same with the head here. Like I try often to give that simple silhouette to a skull or to a head, but I'm always trying to find angles and lines on the side to express a volume that's not necessarily round everywhere. I try to almost slice the side of the head as I feel it is in real life. I'm kind of exaggerating, but it helps to define angles and a bit more what's true about the volume of the head. Same with the neck. I could go and do contour lines if I wanted, if it was at a certain angle to express what's under the jawline. And sort of a character looking up. There's many ways I could go and do an entire hour just on head position and how it affects the neck, the shoulders, how the viewer might see something. Even for me, it's still sort of a struggle sometimes to draw in these positions. So even like I'm just drawing a scribble of a hand here, but there's structure everywhere and volumes everywhere, right? So even like fingers, I could, in a way, draw contour lines or to define in volumes. Again, I could do an entire, video on just fingers or hands or feet. But there's volumes to express. It's not necessarily what I want to do with gesture drawing, but sometimes gesture drawing need to express some kind of volume, and those volumes need to be learned through, study. But this is for another day. Let's talk about weight now. Weight, which is probably my favorite subject, or not subject, but what I find is the most interesting to look at in a drawing that kind of expresses it well. I feel like it's often not talked about or not talked about enough or just hinted at, but to me it's almost everything, especially being a student of animation. Like I've just drawn a figure here that's just standing straight with their hips straight. The best example I can give is how weight can be conveyed or seen or felt with just the hips, right? Like imagine standing in line at an amusement park anywhere, standing in line or queuing. Very often you will sort of have most of your weight that emanates or is, I guess, supported on one leg much more than the other. And when I say much more, it's almost like 90-10 or 80-20. I'm not quite sure. I'm not an expert on this, but most of the weight is supported by one leg, and it goes all the way back to the hip, or where the bone is connected to the hip. And so most of the weight is supported there, goes all the way down to the sole of the foot, or whatever is supporting it. And the other leg really is there to balance, for the person or character to not just fall down. We're two-legged creatures, us humans, so we need most of the time two legs to support ourselves. We can do it on one leg, but that would be annoying. But most of the time, it's something that can be perceived even in life drawing on a character, anyone that you see on the street. You can easily sort of often notice where the weight is by just seeing how they stand. And that position, that movement of the hip, or that sort of angle of the hip, means quite a bit afterwards. It's kind of a starting point to understand weight, at least for me, in figure drawing, because it leaves, like I'm mentioning here, the other leg to adapt. And you can kind of leave it to your imagination. That's something that you as an artist can now play with if you want to push that pose or to change the meaning of it. It doesn't change the weight balancing. It just you kind of decide how you want maybe your characters to balance the rest of that weight, or the balance itself. But most of the weight, if you don't change it, will go through one leg and then be balanced, or the equilibrium will be kept by the other one. So let's move to more on weight. So like I said, most of the weight is usually on one leg, and the other one is sort of like trailing or balancing, but that's not always true, right? When a character is not standing, which is often the case in live drawing, often characters are standing on two legs, but they also, if they're acting a bit more or if they're going on the ground, the weight is supported very differently. And like I'm mentioning here, on the tibia and the forearms and one of the other hand, or if a character is kind of acting like an animal or a monkey, or just walking on four legs, or being more animated, the weight, working out, who knows, the weight can be shifted or supported on the palm of the hand, on the fingers themselves, sometimes, and there's always a shift of weight as well. If you're much more of an animator, that you probably understand, the weight of the body is sort of moving along, and it's almost like you're catching your own weight as you're walking or moving or jumping. This case, just someone standing on their hands, just to show how that's a concept that's, at least to me, very important, and it's something you can feel in your body even when you're drawing. To me, I find it fascinating. Like, I get excited to draw difficult poses like this because it feels like there's something to do. It feels like it's expressing something, and it's not about anatomy. It's not about classicism, I guess, of figure drawing. To me, it relates more to animation and how the weight of the body can shift and can be expressed in so many interesting ways. And it gives you kind of opportunity to give a real life and a real sense of presence, I guess. So weight for me is some of the most important thing. I will probably do many more videos on just weight, and then eventually sort of maybe even animation, little instructions on how weight is sort of needs to be moves towards when in motion, right? It needs to be carried through. Some tips on standing characters with feet, especially. We often think of the feet as being just the sole, but very often what I find the most interesting is when characters are holding weight on just a part of the foot, the tip of the foot, or sometimes just even the toes, especially ballet dancers, for example. You can really feel the tension then in the rest of the legs, especially if it's on more of the toes. And same on the hand or the fingers. It's not just flat hands that will support weight. Sometimes it's a lot on the finger as well. There's tension in the fingers, and someone that can do it for a few seconds or even minutes or more can do it on the tip of their fingers, and it's fascinating to look at how they can do that, and it's interesting to draw. So just before I move on to slightly longer poses, I just want to go over basic body structures, just the way I simplify things, because I realize now that I've talked about many concepts, but a lot of people may be lacking or asking how I simplify the body. Like, I'm not an expert on anatomy. I feel like I know enough and I keep learning, but it's still something that I'd like to get better at, to understand the anatomy. There's many great artists that I think are way superior and better at it than myself. I think I like to know enough of anatomy in order to move forward. I'm much more interested in the angles and the big shapes that they create and the tension that it creates on joints or on flesh. So that's usually how I perceive a profile, even if I knew nothing else about muscles or stretching of the flesh and all that stuff. And I think I could still convey an interesting, at least moving characters, or at least be a decent animator, even if I just knew how to pose that type of, I guess, skeleton or line skeleton well enough. So I'm really trying to simplify it to its essence, or even the angles to their essence, at least for me, to convey the most with the least. So even in the skull, I'm finding those angles. The jaw for me is very important to draw. And I don't draw these squares or blocks for the torso and hip areas. I tend to give them a little bit more anatomy, and I tend to try to find the angles, especially on the side, because I feel like it lets me convey more of the twist or angle or point of view that I'm trying to do. Because right now I'm just drawing a very simple profile and front-on view of the whole character or skeleton. But these could change, like, by just pumping up their chest or moving the hip. Like, everything can be moved in, twisted up and down, and the range of motion is huge, even with those very, very, very simple lines. I'm not even drawing the bones. I didn't even draw the arms over here. But to me, these are enough to convey what I want to convey. So even if I was to just use this for gestures, 30 seconds gesture, for example, that would be enough to go to the next phase afterwards. And the more I know, the more I would then add to it. But I think that would be a good starting point. Here, the face or skull that I kind of draw at the same time, like basically a face with no hair. I tried to give that sort of wedged in area for the eye sockets or eyes area, and I'm always having that side, I don't know how to say it, but that almost like if you were to take a knife to cut that side of the circle on the side of the skull in order to give it some angles that are there in real life. It's just they may be more tapered or rounded out, but for me, if I can simplify it with a harsh angle, it's better than nothing. So here it's that same sort of area that I'm from a profile. And really, I'm drawing really quick here, but that would be if you were to see a bit more from the side with some kind of nose. Still trying to draw that sort of wedge or cave carved in area for the eye area, and same for the mouth and jawline on the side. There's this section that line that goes through the cheek that you can easily, not necessarily draw, but shade if you want. It gives much more information to that angle, and then it's not just a, I don't know how to say it better, but some like a rounded pouch that you just draw at the bottom like a cartoon. it gives much more of a angle and physicality and angle to the anatomy of the head. So this is what I'm trying to do as much as possible, trying to find those angles and that rhythm in the drawing of simple structures. I mean, they're not simple structures, but I'm trying to simplify them. The more I'm drawing these, the more I feel like I should go more and more into it. But since this is supposed to be more about gesture, I didn't want to go too deep in anatomy. But since this is the first time I'm explaining it, it needs to be said that I do rely on certain knowledge about anatomy, and or at least a simplification of it that I've acquired by repetition and looking at books and drawing a lot. But it really helps me simplify when I'm doing gesture drawings. So like I said, like I tend to not draw these sort of circles or circles or squares, either or I think are not enough for the torso and hip areas. So this is the general sort of rib cage that I draw very simply, but I'm overdrawing it right now. I should have stopped a few lines ago. To me, the spine is where it's at because that's what is the support for everything. So I tried to, another concept that I should have gone through is maybe the idea of drawing through and not be afraid to draw through limbs that go over the body under to help understand, because it's all about understanding. Like, it's fun to have one drawing that looks more finished, but I'm much more interested in drawings where and studies where I'm learning and know where things are to eventually be able to do something a bit more flawlessly, I guess. But it's always full of flaws, and I tend to like seeing the process almost more than something that just looks it came out of nowhere. So I do enjoy it myself. So here would be sort of a way I would draw a pelvis. So it's kind of a square, but I'm trying to draw or find, there's always a boxiness, of course, but I feel like it's not appealing to see boxes floating in space. I'm trying to simplify them, but find a certain level of complexity that's still manageable in order to convey something that's very, very organic. So here you go. I'm trying again to draw that combo. All right, let's try to go for legs now very quickly. Again, something I should have maybe have gone through, but I'll go through it in another video possibly. These sort of curves that I'm using back and forth on each side to convey rhythm, but also almost connecting the two sides of the body in an organic way. But here, that's me here internally drawing that sort of boxy or area for the hips at an angle, because it's not just, it's never really standing as a box lying down straight. There's always an angle to the hips and the rib cage areas. So I'm very cognizant of that at all time, even in a standing position. I pushed it a bit more here. It's a bit more of a caricatured pose, but you can see how even the legs themselves are not just, I mean, I'm pushing them a little bit more here, but they're not entirely straight. There's curves to them, especially when you start to push. You can kind of feel yourself when things become a bit uncomfortable, but somehow with the more it's uncomfortable, the more it's pleasing to draw and to feel that the tension in the body when that happens. You know, when you're pushing the pelvis and then your torso reacts in order to balance out the weight. So even in a crouched position or more closed-in position, I'm aware of the structure, especially of the rib area and the ribs and the pelvis. Let's try to move on now. I'm going to try to go a bit more quickly because I want to go into 2-minute poses to finish. But just a general stance. We don't stand Generally, just physically, the structure of our bones isn't straight down. There's an angles. The where it stands in the socket of the hip is more on the side, goes slightly towards the inside to the knee, and then the knee goes back out a little bit for balance. So this is something you can always see in nature and by noticing that in standing poses. This is just me again drawing the rib cage and how everything connects now with the arm. I feel like I'm gonna have to change it a bit later. I think I've drawn the shoulders a bit too up, and really that's not how they would necessarily connect, but I've connected them to the clavicles, I think they're called in front. And the hips, like this is just me trying to do like an organic way, and as you can see, the arms are not straight lines. They're sort of slightly curved for me to express, and they're not necessarily trying to just express the bones themselves, but the feel of the inside of an arm. Because very rarely do we have to draw skeletons, and I would probably draw them differently, but it helps to convey the inside or the energy going through, or the feeling. This is me just drawing a simple arm now with flesh, just kind of a basic structure. I'm really going fast over these because I would love to show how they connect to the chest and the back and all these muscles, because when they're pulled and in tension or released, it really does create interesting shapes and interesting things are happening in the body, of course. But really, this is me just trying to simplify as much to just show very basically how I go over parts of the body. I really do realize how I have so much more to show you guys later on in future videos. On the left is, of course, the bad version. On the right, a better organic version of drawing an arm with these. I'm trying to find an expression here, but these mirroring or going back and forth with angles inside the body or curves inside the body, like the outside of the shoulder, the inside of the bicep, the outside of the forearm, almost like a play without connecting lines that you can always connect with shade afterwards, or shading. This is me trying to give a bit more structure to the forearm. It's not, it's more like almost like a fleshy part with more of a square part around the wrist, because there's way less flesh around the wrist. So there's that connection, and when it turns, it does something else. I should probably do a video on that later on just how when you start moving, just twisting around or twirling around, the forearm shape starts to change. But I wanted to show also, like I drew the hand there, how it doesn't connect just straightly. You can kind of give it a slight angle to make it more interesting. And here, just a very basic thing on how muscles will sort of be crunched, I guess, or forming a bulging muscle, or quite the opposite on when the opposite motion is done. So the biceps and triceps in this case, and you can feel it even when you're doing it. It just in some models you can clearly see these things, and it's interesting to push. Just a very quick way, a very quick, sketchy way of showing how I draw legs. I'm going really much too quickly over these, and I'm sorry. I feel like in the future I will probably do much more of a simplified anatomy class. This whole thing was just about, this video was to introduce a little bit of my process, but I'm realizing now how many components there are to my own process that I've learned throughout the years through teachers and just trial and error mostly, and just going through live drawing and trying to figure it out for myself and applying it myself then in my own work, in storyboarding mostly, back and forth, because that's why I go to live drawing, and especially gesture drawing, is to figure out how to get better, especially especially for sequences that require a little bit more seriousness or sincerity. I think when you're able to draw these things, certain things accurately, or with at least a feeling of authenticity, it helps to convey certain story moments better. This is just me, just simple hand shapes. This is sort of bad hand shapes afterwards. One where there's like a nice, I guess, rhythm to things. One where it's just a scribbly line that could work for some work or for some drawings, especially very quick gesture drawings. But if you can do more, you can always do more. Here I'm trying to convey a little bit more of the shape of the foot. And right now I'm going way too fast. I should really do more on these. It's very difficult to express an entire, I don't want to say lifetime, but years and years of struggling with something and thinking that certain things I take now for granted that I shouldn't. If you do have questions and more questions, please ask me, but all these other things that I haven't covered will cover it on another day. So now I'll just do I'll finish with a few more 2-minute drawings, and till next time. And I'll try to go over those 2-minute drawings as well. So since I have a bit more time now with the 2-minute drawings, there's a few more things I can think of or express. I'm not noodling as much. I'm taking a bit more of my time to express elegant lines and taking a bit more of my time to see those angles of the head, angle of the neck. It's a character walking forward, and it's almost like a mid-stride, like a slight mid-stride, nothing pushed or anything. Once again, I need to mention that I am using references for these ones. I'm using a website called Bodies in Motion that I pay for, the commercial use, by Scott Eaton. These are fantastic. If you know what Muybridge, or I think that's what it's called, Muybridge, did years and years and years, 100 years at least more ago. These old books where you see actions in many images, so to kind of see how it's really helpful for animators. It's been referenced by almost every animator I know. But now this website kind of does the same thing with high definition cameras and going around actors and athletes, acrobats, and just for live drawing as well. There's a series of things. It does cost money, but I think it's well worth it if you're serious about, especially now in quarantine, where I feel like I draw much more from the computer now. I'm trying to learn a different way. I don't think anything beats drawing from life, but to me that's the next best thing. So bodiesinmotion.com. Check it out. And they have this sort of quick draw thing where, similar to Croquis Cafe or similar websites, you can sort of set up what you want to look at, types of poses, and then the amount of time you want to spend on them, and then it's just going to kind of flip through these drawings. So this drawing here in particular is a sort of an acrobat or circus performer hanging on sort of a table, and really there's so much going on. I'm really trying my best to convey the foreshortening and the tension and the weight that is solely supported, or she's hanging on by both her arms. And I'm going to draw the cable later, but right now I'm trying to convey that sort of line of action that we talked about, and the foreshortening here that's happening. One leg is coming slightly forward the screen, and the other leg in the back is going towards the back. So trying to, if I may show these sort of contour lines, how that would be expressed in lines. But I'm trying to find these, I call them anchor points, but I'm sure they're landmarks every artist uses different words, but maybe landmarks, especially since she's wearing tight clothes, to show how it goes around her leg and use that as a line instead of drawing lines that are not there. So here she's hanging on this sort of cable, or I'm not sure how it's called, but I think I'm getting close to 2 minutes, trying to find those nice angles, things I could have done better. I always wish I could start redrawing or fixing, but that's not the point of gesture drawing. It should be to learn sort of on the spot and move on to the next drawing. Here we go. All right, so this one is great. This is obviously a sort of a ballet dancer that's standing on, I don't know, it's a tippy toe or the very pushed way on both the tip of her toes. Very straight, so I'm trying to convey that, even though her legs, like I mentioned before, are not perfectly straight because of the very innate angles that they have, but they're doing their best to have that line in the middle of her body to be as straight as possible. That's what I'm trying to convey. Even the head and the way she holds her neck, her head, her shoulders are up, her head is pushed back down, backwards, really trying to be as centered as possible. And a lot of the weight is on that first leg there. Very interesting pose. We often talk about things being organic and everything, but I do love, especially when it's done so well, these poses that express some kind of rigidity, but class and grace at the same time, especially those performers. I'm always looking for those. And that website, Bodies in Motion, is full of these very able athletes and performers and professional um, circus people and ballerinas, and in this case, and dancers and martial artists. So it's a wonderful website to explore if you're interested in very pushed, very interesting poses that are not just your typical live drawing, 5 to 10 minute pose. I tend to not want to draw past 2 minutes. I can do once in a while a 5, but I just feel like anything else is not my forte. I lose patience, I lose interest. I'm all about quick poses. Maybe I should spend more time with those other poses to learn something else, but I just feel like there's so much to learn from just that first phase. I feel like all the important information for me is at the very beginning, and there's an art form to just pursuing that for me. I feel like it's endless trying to find those angles and ways I can simplify and express things with less than with more. I'm not an expert with colors or even shading. I'm much more interested in what I can use afterwards in storyboarding and just simple drawings. So for me, like I mentioned over and over, the exercise of gesture drawing is wonderful because it does all of that. It helps me convey a lot of emotion and intent with as little line as possible. And if a sequence needs fixing or needs to be changed in any ways, well, I haven't spent as much time as I would have if I was trying to do the same but struggling with convey as much with less line. I would have to use more lines and more effort and more erasing and redoing. So to me, the more effortless I can do little sketches, the more I can convey an idea clearly and I guess better by trying to really simplify appealing poses in as little line as possible. And also know what is appealing, not appealing. It's a term that's coined over and over, appeal. We all find our own appeal in everything. I'm talking about the sort of very classical art, classic expression of appeal. It's not something I'd like to debate, but this is what I'm looking for when doing gesture drawing. The typical definition of appeal. So these long continuous lines, swooping curves, the balance of angles and curves, of pushing and pulling, tension, really like figuring out where the weight is, especially right now with these legs, and almost trying in the upper body, like almost using the upper body as an arrow, like the two arms forming an arrow towards the head that's tilted, and the nose is pointing almost at where I want the energy to go to, but not forgetting the weight or the stance of the feet, using a little cast shadow here to convey a little bit of weight. I'm going to try some slight contour lines and shading to just slightly express more of a presence, and a light source to just kind of express something a bit more, but without overworking it. So I think that does it for these 2-minute poses. I believe that is the last one of this set. Let's see.